Turncoats, traitors, and double-crossers are generally frowned upon in the real world. But how do defectors fit into Planetside 2? Is it a bad thing, or sometimes can it be good? So sit tight as I go over the pros and cons of the 4th Factioner. Getting it out of the way early, I am a 4th Factioner, guys. I faction hop more than a one-legged kangaroo, so this isn't going to be some witch hunt or anything, but I do think there are different types of 4th Factioning, and sometimes they are in a grey area of good and bad effects. 4th Factioning is a boogeyman that looms over Planetside 2, often referred to as a faction in of itself of players who switch factions due to several reasons, which will be elaborated on in this video. So let's get the bad out of the way. 4th Factioning the winning side. On countless alerts and battles, a mass exodus could be observed of planetmans piling across to the likely victors. It has lessened with the turn of XP linking to contribution for alerts, but it does still seem to happen. The reality though is more likely the losers are logging out, but either way, being a glory supporter isn't all that glorious. The worst of the worst 4th Factioning is the embolismic rager some players fall prey to, often caused by severe ownage or domination by kill streaks, and we see players log off their accounts to team kill the person that outskilled them, or in their own minds the person that was a shitter and deserved it. This form of 4th Factioning really isn't to be tolerated, and thankfully DBG do take intentional team killing like this as a bannable offence. Then we have the grey area. It's a little murky, so stay close and I'll guide you. Firstly, switching factions for a good fight. Sometimes you look across your map and realise there are no fights that suit you anywhere. For me, I like medium to large size fights, but some people like little scrims, especially if they're short on frames per second. Similarly, if you don't like biolabs and there's only biolabs on your side, you might be tempted to switch sides. It is also often that two factions fight each other on several fronts, but barely focus or pay attention to the third faction. There are lots of factors why, sometimes avoiding your faction's Zerg Horde, sometimes because they are focusing on the ones winning the alert, and sometimes it's just the way the battle flowed on the map. So hopping factions to get into a fight may appease your bloodlust, but it doesn't solve the problem, and perhaps even removes one of the players with enough vision to open up fights on your side. Another reason to 4th Faction is for variety. With 3 factions and special weapons and traits on each faction, playing them all can be refreshing and keep yourself from suffering burnout. Also, if you're a free player, the default items on each faction have as much variety as buying another weapon to use which costs money or certification points. And in my opinion, could be a good way to rotate your 3 free slots. On the other side of this coin, there is role-playing. Sure, Planetside 2 doesn't have the most solid lore, but there are a lot of die-hard loyalists, which play and live on one of the factions. Playing another faction is blasphemy to these players, but they are a big part of what makes these battles meaningful. Like some outfits, Miller used line tactics on TR because they believe they are redcoat in the Araxian War for Independence. Then we have the underdog warriors. The ones that see an underpopulated faction and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to fight for you. And that is a gallant way to approach fighting. But not everyone sees the game that way. The developers have tested a system on the public test server that might remedy faction hopping, called Continental Faction Overpopulation Queue. Basically, if the highest population faction is 10% or higher than the lowest faction, the highest will have to queue. This might actually promote 4th Factioning if there are big fights on a certain continent. Players may have to switch factions just to get in. This is good in a sense of balanced, meaning that all the factions will be balanced on a continent, but obviously has some problems when taking into account people usually play with friends or outfits, and platoons that harbour 48 people. It just isn't worth it for a lot of people to split up from their friends and their allies. So there we have it. On one side, the two-timing Benedict Arnold stool pigeon, quisling rebel Judas backsliders, and on the other, heroic separatists, individualists, and the ever so slightly curious. Now I have thoroughly pillaged the thesaurus for traitorous and rebel-related synonyms. What do you all think of fourth factioning? Could it be an avenue to keep the game fresh for you, or is it something you wouldn't touch with a 10-foot barge pole? If you thought the video was a turncoat cum martyr, then give it a thumbs up. If you thought it was a two-timing snake, then give it a dislike. Subscribe for the next dive into Planetside 2's updates, mechanics, and more. And just to mention, I did 2 competitions with IMSI, a social networking site, and they went quite well. And if you haven't got your prize yet, double check your messages. You have to go onto the sidebar and look at the chat with us bar on IMSI, because you should have got a message in there. What I wanted to mention is that I have a Joshino section, and basically it's for anybody that really wants to input on my channel and my upcoming content. I'm going to release my drafts and my ideas there. And if there's anything you want to add to them, or if you've got an opinion that you think I should include in my content, or you think I've messed up in my videos, or you want to post something a bit longer, like a critique or feedback, then just throw it in there. And that link will be in the description. And there's also going to be another competition very soon. So until next time, everybody, Joshino.